Ammunition ran out, water ran out, but her determination never did. What happened next will leave you speechless. This is the story of Sergeant Elena Vasquez, a woman who defied impossible odds when 50 innocent lives depended on her alone. But the real shock was yet to come. Just when everything seemed under control, Elena found herself in a game where even her closest allies couldn't be trusted. And this is where the truly dramatic story began. The scorching desert sun beat down mercilessly on the remote outpost of Forward Operating Base Mirage. The temperature gauge read 127 degrees Fahrenheit in the shade, but there was precious little shade to be found. Sergeant Elena Vasquez wiped the sweat from her brow as she checked her watch. 0800 hours. Day one of what would become the longest week of her life. Elena was not your typical soldier. At 5 feet 4 inches and 125 pounds, she looked more like someone you'd find teaching kindergarten than defending a military installation. Her dark hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, and her brown eyes held a quiet intensity that her fellow soldiers had learned to respect. She had joined the Army at 18, driven by a desire to prove that courage had nothing to do with size or gender. Vasquez, barked Lieutenant Colonel Morrison, a gruff man in his 50s whose weathered face told the story of 3 decades in the desert. Intel says we might have company coming our way. Hostile forces, possibly battalion strength. Elena felt her stomach tighten. Battalion strength meant at least 500 enemy fighters. Their small outpost housed only 52 people, 42 soldiers, and 10 civilian contractors working on a water purification project for local villages. The math was not in their favor. But what happened next would shatter every assumption about what one person could accomplish when everything was on the line. The first indication that this wasn't just another intelligence report came at 0347 hours on day 2. Elena was on watch duty, her eyes scanning the horizon through night vision goggles when she spotted movement. At first, it was just a shimmer in the heat distortion, easily dismissed as a mirage. But then she saw the unmistakable glint of metal catching moonlight. Contact, contact! Elena's voice crackled over the radio. Multiple vehicles approaching from the southeast, approximately 2 clicks out. The base erupted into controlled chaos. Soldiers scrambled to defensive positions while civilians were herded into the reinforced bunker that would become their home for the next 6 days. Elena watched through her scope as the first wave of enemy vehicles came into view. Technical trucks mounted with heavy machine guns, armored personnel carriers, and what looked like improvised rocket launchers. Lieutenant Colonel Morrison appeared at Elena's position, his face grim. How many? Elena continued counting, her training taking over despite the fear gnawing at her gut. I count at least 40 vehicles, sir. Mixed composition. They're setting up a perimeter about 800 meters out. This was her breaking point moment. Elena knew that 50 innocent lives now rested on the shoulders of 42 soldiers, and soon, primarily on hers alone. The first attack came with the dawn of day 2. A thunderous barrage of rocket-propelled grenades and mortar rounds rained down on the outpost. Elena pressed herself against the sandbags of her fighting position, feeling the concussions rattle her teeth. The air filled with dust, smoke, and the acrid smell of high explosives. Return fire! Return fire! Morrison's voice barely carried over the chaos. Elena shouldered her M4 rifle and began engaging targets. Her first shot dropped an enemy fighter who had gotten too close to the perimeter. Her second and third shots forced a machine gun team to take cover. But for every enemy she could see, there seemed to be 5 more hiding in the rocky terrain surrounding their position. The siege had begun. As the sun set on day 2, Elena had no idea that she was about to face a betrayal that would change everything. Day 3 brought a new kind of hell. The enemy had learned from their first assault and were now using more sophisticated tactics. They had positioned snipers in the surrounding hills, making it deadly for anyone to move around the base during daylight hours. Elena was checking ammunition supplies when she heard Lieutenant Rodriguez calling for her. Vasquez, we got wounded in Sector 7. Martinez took a sniper round. She grabbed her medical kit and sprinted across the compound, zigzagging to avoid the sniper fire that kicked up dirt clouds around her feet. Private Martinez was down, blood seeping from shoulder wound. Elena's combat medic training kicked in as she applied pressure to stop the bleeding. "You're going to be okay," she whispered to Martinez, though she wasn't sure she believed it herself. Their medical supplies were already running low, and the evacuation helicopter that should have arrived yesterday was nowhere to be seen. But the real shock came when Elena discovered that their position had been compromised from within. It was late on day 3 when Elena noticed something that made her blood run cold. During a brief lull in the fighting, she was reviewing the tactical situation with Morrison when she spotted something troubling in the enemy's attack patterns. "Sir," she said quietly, pulling Morrison aside. "Look at this." She pointed to her hastily drawn map of the enemy positions. "They're not attacking our strongest defensive positions. They're consistently hitting exactly where we're weakest, almost like they know our defensive plan." Morrison's face darkened. "What are you suggesting, Sergeant?" "I'm not suggesting anything, sir. I'm stating a fact. Someone is feeding them intelligence." The possibility of a traitor in their midst sent a chill through the command post that had nothing to do with the desert night. Elena found herself looking at her fellow soldiers with new eyes, wondering who among them might be responsible for the deaths that were sure to come. Time was running out. Water reserves, 30%. Ammunition, 40%. Medical supplies, 20%. But Elena's determination, still 100%. Day 4 dawned with the worst news yet. Their radio equipment had been damaged in the previous night's bombardment, cutting off their communication with headquarters. They were now truly on their own, with no way to call for reinforcement or evacuation. Elena was checking the radio equipment when she heard the sound that chilled her to the bone, the distinctive whistle of incoming artillery. But this wasn't random fire. The shells were landing with surgical precision, targeting their ammunition depot, their water storage tanks, their vehicle maintenance area. "Take cover," Elena screamed, diving behind a concrete barrier as the first shell exploded just 50 meters away. The blast wave knocked her flat, filling her lungs with dust and her ears with ringing. When the bombardment ended, Elena surveyed the damage. Half their ammunition was gone. Their water reserves were down to a 3-day supply. And worst of all, they had lost 6 more soldiers. This was the moment when Elena realized that survival wasn't just about fighting the enemy outside the walls. It was about confronting the enemy within. The breakthrough came on day 5, but not in the way Elena had hoped. She was conducting a security sweep of the civilian shelter when she discovered a hidden satellite phone tucked behind some supplies. Her hands trembled as she realized what this meant. Someone had been communicating with the outside, someone who wasn't supposed to have access to communications equipment. Elena's mind raced through the possibilities. Who had access to this area? Who would benefit from prolonging the siege? And then it hit her like a physical blow. Dr. Marcus Webb, the lead civilian contractor on the water purification project. She found Webb in the corner of the shelter, tending to one of the wounded civilians. He looked up as she approached, and for just a split second, she saw something in his eyes that confirmed her worst fears: guilt. "Dr. Webb," Elena said quietly, her hand resting on her sidearm. "We need to talk." What Elena discovered next would redefine everything she thought she knew about courage, sacrifice, and the true meaning of heroism. Webb didn't deny it when confronted. In fact, he seemed almost relieved to finally tell the truth. "You don't understand," he said, his voice shaking. "They have my daughter, my 16-year-old daughter. They show me pictures. They said they would kill her if I didn't cooperate." Elena felt a wave of conflicted emotions: anger at the betrayal, sympathy for a father's impossible choice, and fear about what this meant for their chances of survival. "How long?" she asked. "Since the beginning. They contacted me 3 months ago. Said they knew I was coming here, knew about the project. They wanted intelligence about base security, troop movements, defensive positions." Elena's training warred with her humanity. By military law, Webb was a traitor who had caused the deaths of her fellow soldiers. But by human standards, he was a desperate father trying to save his child. Elena faced an impossible choice: follow military protocol and execute a traitor, or find another way to save both Webb's daughter and the 50 lives still depending on her. "Here's what we're going to do," Elena said after a long moment of consideration. "You're going to help us end this tonight." Webb looked up with desperate hope in his eyes. Ow! Elena's plan was audacious in its simplicity. Webb would use his communication channel to send false intelligence to the enemy, information that would lure them into a trap. But for it to work, Elena would have to do something that went against every instinct she had as a soldier. She would have to trust a traitor. The plan went into motion at 2,200 hours on day 6. Webb sent a message to his handlers, claiming that the base's defenders were planning to break out at dawn through the eastern perimeter, their strongest defensive position. In reality, Elena was preparing for something entirely different. Using the cover of darkness, Elena led a small team of volunteers in a dangerous mission. They would slip out through the western perimeter, the one the enemy had been avoiding because they thought it was heavily defended, and attack the enemy's command post. "Remember," Elena whispered to her team of 5 volunteers, "we don't need to win a battle. We just need to create enough chaos to break their command structure. Make them think they're facing a larger force than they actually are." What happened next was 7 minutes of pure adrenaline that would determine whether 50 people lived or died. The team moved like ghosts through the desert night. Elena had blackened her face with boot polish and wore only the essential gear: rifle, ammunition, grenades, and a prayer. Behind her, Corporal Johnson, Private First Class Kim, Specialist Rodriguez, Private Thompson, and surprisingly, Dr. Webb, who had insisted on joining the mission as a form of redemption. They covered the 800 meters to the enemy command post in 30 minutes, moving in short rushes between cover. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs as they approached the cluster of vehicles and tents that served as the enemy headquarters. Through her night vision scope, Elena could see at least 20 enemy fighters around the command post. The odds were 4-1 against her team, but they had the advantage of surprise. "On my signal," Elena whispered into her radio. 3, 2, 1, execute. For the next 7 minutes, Elena and her small team fought like lions, knowing that failure meant death for everyone they had sworn to protect. Elena's first grenade landed directly in the center of the enemy command tent. The explosion sent maps, radios, and personnel flying in all directions. Before the enemy could react, her team opened fire with everything they had. Corporal Johnson's machine gun cut down 3 fighters who were rushing toward their position. PFC Kim's well-aimed shots took out 2 more who were trying to set up a mortar. Elena herself engaged a group of enemies who were attempting to flank their position, her rifle firing with mechanical precision. But it was Dr. Webb who surprised everyone. The middle-aged civilian contractor moved with unexpected courage, throwing grenades and providing covering fire as Elena's team maneuvered around the enemy position. The chaos was exactly what Elena had hoped for. Confused by the attack from an unexpected direction, unsure of how large the attacking force was, the enemy began to withdraw from their positions around the base perimeter to reinforce their command post. Getting in was hard. Getting out alive seemed impossible. Elena's team had accomplished their mission, but now they faced the deadly task of fighting their way back to base. Enemy reinforcements were converging on their position from all directions. "Move! Move! Move!" Elena shouted, leading her team in a fighting withdrawal toward their own lines. Bullets snapped past her head as she zigzagged between rocky outcroppings, using every piece of cover the desert provided. Private Thompson stumbled and went down, blood spreading across his leg from a bullet wound. Without hesitation, Elena slung her rifle and hauled him to his feet, supporting his weight as they continued their desperate flight. "Leave me," Thompson gasped. "I'm slowing you down." "Not happening," Elena replied through gritted teeth. "We all go home, or nobody goes home." As dawn broke on the 7th day, Elena faced her greatest challenge yet, leading a desperate final defense with almost no ammunition and no hope of rescue. The raid on the enemy command post had bought them time, but it had also enraged their attackers. As the sun rose on day 7, Elena could see that the enemy was massing for what would clearly be a final, overwhelming assault. Lieutenant Colonel Morrison was wounded now, having taken shrapnel from a mortar round during the night. Command of the defense fell to Elena, a sergeant leading majors, captains, and lieutenants in what might be their last battle. "Listen up," Elena called out to the assembled defenders. "We got maybe 2 hours of ammunition left. Water for one day. But we've also got something they don't have. We're fighting for each other. Every person in that bunker is counting on us. Every person in this compound is worth fighting for." With enemy forces massing for their final assault, Elena made a decision that would either save 50 lives or ensure they all died together. The final attack began at 0800 hours with artillery barrage that was unlike anything they had experienced. The ground shook continuously as shell after shell impacted around the base perimeter. Elena pressed herself against the sandbags and tried to count the seconds between explosions. There weren't any. It was one continuous roar of destruction. When the barrage finally lifted, Elena raised her head to see a sight that would have broken lesser soldiers. At least 200 enemy fighters were advancing on their position from 3 directions simultaneously. Technical trucks loaded with fighters, armored vehicles, and what looked like every enemy soldier in the region. "Here they come," Elena shouted into her radio. "All positions, weapons free. Give them everything we've got." For the next hour, Elena and her 41 remaining soldiers fought like lions defending their den, knowing that 50 innocent lives hung in the balance. Elena's rifle grew hot in her hands as she fired round after round into the advancing enemy forces. Her first magazine dropped an enemy machine gunner. Her second scattered a group of fighters trying to rush their position. By her third magazine, enemy soldiers were climbing over the perimeter walls. "Fall back to secondary positions," Elena commanded, leading a fighting withdrawal deeper into the base. They had practiced this maneuver dozens of times, but never under such desperate circumstances. Specialist Martinez, despite his wounded shoulder, was laying down, covering fire with his squad automatic weapon. Corporal Johnson had taken over a mortar and was dropping rounds with deadly accuracy into the enemy formations. Every soldier was fighting as if their life depended on it, because it did. Elena found herself face-to-face with an enemy fighter who had made it through their defensive line. Time slowed as he raised his rifle toward her. Elena's combat training took over. She dove left, rolled, and came up firing. Her 3-round burst dropped him before he could get a shot off. Just when all seemed lost, when Elena was down to her last magazine and the enemy was breaching their final defensive line, something happened that no one could have predicted. Elena was preparing for what she was certain would be her final stand when she heard it, the distinctive sound of helicopter rotors in the distance. At first, she thought it was her imagination, her mind creating hope where none existed. But the sound grew louder, and suddenly the radio crackled to life. "Mirage Base, this is Cavalry 6-7. We have you in sight. Danger close fire mission incoming. Mark your positions with smoke." Elena's hand shook as she grabbed a smoke grenade and pulled the pin. Purple smoke billowed up from their position as she heard the blessed sound of Apache attack helicopters engaging the enemy forces that had surrounded them. The transformation was instantaneous. Enemy fighters who had been pressing their attack suddenly found themselves under fire from above. The organized assault dissolved into chaos as the enemy tried to take cover from the helicopter's 30mm cannons and Hellfire missiles. Within minutes, what had seemed like certain death transformed into miraculous salvation. But Elena's ordeal was far from over. The helicopter gunships were followed by transport helicopters carrying a full company of reinforcements. Elena watched through tears of exhaustion and relief as fresh soldiers fast-roped down into their compound. Their clean uniforms and full equipment loads a stark contrast to her own battered appearance. Captain Sarah Mitchell, the company commander, approached Elena with obvious respect. "Sergeant Vasquez? I'm Captain Mitchell, 2nd Battalion, 75th Rangers. We received your situation report via Dr. Webb's communication device. Outstanding work holding this position. Elena looked around at her surviving soldiers. Dirty, exhausted, some wounded but all alive. They had held against impossible odds, with limited supplies, and despite internal betrayal, they had protected every single civilian in their care. But the biggest shock was yet to come. What Elena learned about Dr. Webb's daughter would change everything she thought she knew about sacrifice and heroism. As the base was being secured and casualties evacuated, Captain Mitchell pulled Elena aside with information that left her stunned. "Sergeant, there's something you need to know about Dr. Webb's situation. We've been tracking this enemy group for months, and his daughter, she was never actually captured." Elena felt the world tilt slightly. "What do you mean?" The photos they showed him, the threats, they were all fabricated. His daughter has been safely at college in Colorado this entire time. The enemy used social media photos and digital manipulation to convince him she was in danger. Elena sank onto a nearby crate, the full magnitude of the deception hitting her. Dr. Webb had betrayed his own people based on a lie, and then risked his life to make amends for a betrayal that was built on false premises. As Elena processed this final revelation, she realized that heroism wasn't just about facing external enemies. It was about confronting the complex moral challenges that make us human. Dr. Webb broke down when Elena told him the truth about his daughter. "I destroyed everything for nothing," he sobbed. "Good people died because I was a fool." Elena surprised herself with her response. "Good people died because bad people attacked us. You made a mistake based on fear for your child. That doesn't make you evil. And when you had the chance to make it right, you risked everything to help us." That's what I remember. The final casualty count was better than anyone had dared hope. Despite 7 days of siege, intense combat, and overwhelming enemy forces, they had lost only 8 soldiers. Every single civilian contractor survived. Elena's desperate defense had worked. What Elena didn't know was that her actions during those 7 days would be studied in military academies for decades to come. 6 months later, Elena stood in full dress uniform in the East Room of the White House. The President of the United States was reading from a citation that seemed to describe someone else's actions. For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of her life above and beyond the call of duty, Sergeant Elena Vasquez distinguished herself during 7 days of combat operations against a numerically superior enemy force. Despite being outnumbered more than 10-1, Sergeant Vasquez led the successful defense of forward operating Base Mirage, protecting the lives of 50 personnel through exceptional courage, tactical brilliance, and unwavering determination. As the President placed the Medal of Honor around Elena's neck, she thought not about the ceremony or the recognition, but about her fellow soldiers who had fought beside her, the civilians who had trusted her to keep them safe, and even Dr. Webb, who had learned that redemption was always possible. Elena's story became more than just a tale of military heroism. It became a testament to what ordinary people can accomplish when they refuse to give up. Today, Elena serves as an instructor at the Army's Command and General Staff College, teaching the next generation of military leaders about small unit tactics, crisis leadership, and the moral complexities of modern warfare. Her students often ask her about those 7 days in the desert, wanting to understand how she found the strength to keep fighting when everything seemed hopeless. Courage isn't about not being afraid, she tells them. Courage is about being terrified and doing what needs to be done anyway. Those 50 people didn't need a hero. They just needed someone who refused to quit. Anyone could have done what I did. The only difference is I was the one who was there. Elena's story reminds us that true heroism isn't about superhuman strength or fearlessness. It's about ordinary people making extraordinary choices when everything is on the line. Elena never saw Dr. Webb again after that day in the desert, but she heard that he had returned to his work with renewed purpose, designing water purification systems for refugee camps around the world. She likes to think that their conversation about redemption had played a part in that decision. The enemy commander who had laid siege to forward operating Base Mirage was captured 3 months later. During his interrogation, he was asked why his forces had ultimately failed to overrun such a small, isolated outpost. His answer was simple. We plan for everything except someone like her. The story of Elena Vasquez is a powerful reminder that heroes walk among us every day. Teachers, parents, first responders, and ordinary citizens who rise to extraordinary challenges when called upon. Her 7 days under siege show us that the most powerful weapon we possess isn't technology or superior numbers, but the human capacity to protect others regardless of the cost to ourselves. If Elena's story of courage and sacrifice moved you, please share it with others who need to be reminded that ordinary people are capable of extraordinary things. Subscribe for more stories of unsung heroes who prove that when everything is on the line, the size of your heart matters more than the size of your army. Remember Sergeant Elena Vasquez, the woman who proved that sometimes the smallest soldier casts the longest shadow, and that true strength isn't measured by what you can destroy, but by what you're willing to protect.